So we received very interesting responses to the SPAC concept. It's a concept which was not well understood in South Africa. It's only recently been legislated for by the JSE. And when we explained it, I think people understood exactly what we were trying to achieve. What was unique in our circumstance is the JSE rules didn't prescribe any particular formulation for a SPAC, and we were left to try and define a regime that we thought were well suited to our purposes. And so in that instance, what was critically important to us was high degree of credibility, high degree of visibility, and a level of transparency that we wanted to ensure the market understood. The other thing that we wanted to do was ensure that our rewards and our incentives were completely aligned with the interests of our shareholders. So in that regard, people appreciated the fact that we're taking no salaries, we're getting no remuneration, there's no pecuniary reward to the founders and the executive team until such time as shareholders participate in the value we create, which is all about our name value, capital appreciation. And so I think across the board that was very well received by the investment community. So I have been involved with many SPACs and SPAC funders and sponsors over the course of my career. And while we haven't spoken to any of them specifically in the context of capital appreciation as to their experience, it is something that I've discussed with many of these founders and sponsors in the past as to where the opportunity for a SPAC has arisen, the types of opportunities that lend themselves well to a SPAC transaction, and some of the challenges that those transactions present. So I think organizationally we have lots of knowledge on how best to pursue the strategy that we've outlined. So I think the current economic climate in South Africa actually lends itself exceptionally well for SPAC transactions. What we bring to the table is an enormous amount of experience collectively amongst our leadership. We bring capital and we bring an ambition for growth. And so in this economy where businesses are very solid and have a good fundamental underpinning, their biggest constraint is capital and sometimes a lack of vision for strategic expansion. And I think we bring the capital to help fund that growth. And I think we bring the leadership who's been through a number of economic cycles in South Africa that can help guide the business through a period of transition as it moves from a period of economic stagnation or difficulty into what will be a period of further economic growth down the line. International expansion for us is going to be a function of the opportunity that we pursue. We're not border bound at all in what we look at once we've made our first viable asset acquisition. And so whatever the strategic direction of the underlying companies that we acquire, we will pursue that destiny in the ordinary course. And so we think that there's lots of growth opportunity outside the South African borders. We think there's tremendous opportunity for growth of solid South African businesses in exporting its intellectual capital and its capacity into the African continent. And what works well in the African continent probably works very well in other emerging markets. So our view is we needed to find an acquisition which forms the basis of a platform for further expansion, and that expansion will be in its own core market of expertise and also then in adjacencies. And those adjacencies and expansions will often find itself outside South Africa's borders. So we are totally committed to an international growth strategy off the back of our first acquisition that we make. So we don't have any specific candidate in mind, but we have done a lot of work in identifying potential opportunities. We've been at this since January of this year, and we have 3 interesting opportunities that we're pursuing currently. We have to try and determine whether or not we can come to an agreement with each of those companies. But it is something that we are going to be working on very diligently to see whether or not we can execute. Each one of them, circumstances are quite different, but each one of them has fantastic growth prospects. Some of them are, one of them in particular is all about international expansion and pursuing a capacity that this business has into the African continent and beyond. The other is constrained by its own capital resources within the parent company that it currently sits. And I think our capital base and the expertise of our management team lends itself well to helping that company to pursue its destiny. And we think that they're all very fertile businesses. One of the criteria in determining what business to pursue is that under the rules of the SPAC, any acquisition we make has to be a viable asset, which means in and of itself, it has to be able to satisfy the criteria for listing on the main board of the stock exchange. So it has to have a track record in terms of historical performance, it has to have a minimum level of financial viability and profitability, and it needs to be a business of sufficient scale that would be interesting and attractive to investors in companies on the JSE main board. So all three of these candidates fit that bill, and whether or not we can come to an agreement on them, time will tell. But if those aren't the three, then there are plenty others that we have that we're going to pursue as well.